In this video is for people who are making simple by-cell classifications in their ARFF file for stock predictions. And what I will show you is how to make that a stronger buy or sell indicator by changing the value of the classification attribute in your ARFF file. In for this video I used the random forest classifier. I won't show you using the WEKA Explorer or the actual Java code that built the ARFF files. All that stuff is presented in previous videos. I'll show you snippets of the code and the output from the WEKA Explorer. So, on to the foils. So we're going to start off with a simple buy or sell classification and not a regression. The classifier used was the random forest. I found that the IBK classifier worked just as well. In the ARFF file, there are all the attributes related to what we're studying, plus the most important one is the class, which is the last attribute file that I use in the ARFF files. In this case, it's a simple buy or sell indicator. To build a buy or sell, we just take a look at the difference between the current date and the number of so many days out. And what I'll be using in this sample is 5 days out. If the difference is greater than 1, we just put a buy value into the attribute. Otherwise, we'll put a sell value into the attribute. I didn't have to use a division. I could have just used a simple test, but you'll see later why I do a division. So we run it through the random forest classifier, and this is the output summary and the confusion matrix that is used. And if further into the summary, we see that we got almost a 79% correctly classified instances and 21% incorrectly, which at 79% is not too bad. Take a quick look at the confusion matrix again. We got correctly called 144 out of 184 buys and a correctly call of sells of 130 out of 164. But let's just take that a step further and refine that buy or sell. And in this case, we'll have a capital buy or a strong buy, a small sell, and a capital sell. And but before we do any of that, building that attribute, the class attribute, we're going to find out the average buy situation and the average sell situation, and we go through all of the closes and looking out 5 days. We take our division, which we mentioned before, and we add that. If it's greater than 1, we add that change to the average buy situation, and otherwise we add it to the average sell situation. And then further down, when we're writing out the class value to our file, if the value of the current date, if the difference is greater than 1, then we know that it's a buy situation. And if that value is greater than the buy average, then it's a capital buy. Otherwise, it's a small buy. And likewise, if the difference is less than the sell average, then we have a capital sell. Otherwise, it's just a small sell. And then we have the random forest output. If we look at the instances data, we see that the correctly called has been greatly reduced from our 79% down to 56%, and incorrectly is obviously bumped up to 43%. But what's most important, we want to take a look at the confusion matrix. Now, if you look at this, the most important thing I use is I combine values. And this is what we do. Column A, position 1, is correctly called capital buys. But an incorrectly called small by is still a by. So what I like to do is I add those two together and divide it against the incorrectly called cells. In this case, we have a case of 61 buys in our capital by out of 61 calls, which gives us a 98% correct call for a buy. Not a capital buy, but all buys. Likewise, the small buy is a combination of its incorrectly called strong buy with its small buy divided by the total sum for all the buy calls. In this case, we get a 72% correct call, which is not too bad. Of course, 98% is much better. 72% is nothing to sniff at. Again, the small cell is a combination of the strong cell, which is the column D on line 3, and the small cell on column C on line 3. And we get 82 out of 112 calls that are correct. And that bumps up to, that's about 73%, not bad. Likewise, the capital cell is a combination of the capital cell D, line 4D, and line 4C, which is a small cell. You've combined those two, you get 45, and the total sum of all calls is 52. So the correct calls for that one is 87%. So let's take it one step further. In this case, we're going to have a strong buy, a capital buy, a small cell, a capital cell, and a strong cell. And in this case, the part of the Java code that writes out the class values is going to test the difference of the, again, of the number of days out divided by the current day. If the difference is greater than the average, we're going to make that a strong buy, which in the previous case was just a capital buy. Capital buy now becomes the midpoint between 1 and the halfway point of the average buy situation. And if it's less than the average, half of the average, then it's simply a small buy. Likewise, in the for a cell situation, if the difference is less than the average cell, then we make that a strong cell. Again, back to the previous case, this was a regular capital cell. The capital cell now becomes the midpoint between 1 and the average cell. And likewise, everything else is a lowercase cell. So we run it through the random forest classifier, and this is the output. And as you can see, again, the correctly called instances is again even worse, and the incorrectly called instances is greater, but that is really of no concern. But we'll just take a quick look at the initial simple buy cell. We got a 78% correctly called, and in the buy cell, or capital buy small cell, we got a 56%. So as you can see, the correctly called instances has been greatly reduced. Now let's take a look at the confusion matrix. In the confusion matrix, the strong buy is a combination of all buys on line 1, which would be column A, B, and C. And if you divide that by all calls, you get the actual number of buy calls. In this case, we get a 98% correct call rate for buys, which is pretty much the same as before. The capital buy now becomes 45 out of 53. We combine the values of A, B, and C on line 2, divided by all calls, and we get a 85% call rate. And the small buy, again, includes the, for line 3, includes all the values for A, B, and C divided by all the calls for that call, and we get a 62% or 63% correct call rate, which isn't too bad. Likewise, cell, combination of D, E, and F for line 4 gives us 41 correct calls out of 61. for 67%. The capital sell, the sum of D, E, and F for line 5 is 42 out of all the calls for that line is 51s. We get a 82% call, which is a big improvement. Finally, the strong cell, which is the sum of D, E, and F on the last line, divided by all the calls. It gets a 48 correct calls out of 52, which is 92%, which is a fantastic cell indicator. So by refining out your buy and sell indicators into strong and weak indicators, you can improve the chances of getting a good call. If I ran this program and I saw a strong buy call, I would have a pretty good confidence. And likewise, if I had a strong sell call, I'd have a pretty good confidence that a sell is coming up in the next 5 days. So if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks.